I wonder if you feel strongly one way or the other about the way ending the line might impact results in primaries in New Jersey. The idea here is that it might help the little guy. But when you look across the races that are at hand this evening, what's the impact?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. I think this will be a really interesting test of kind of the impact of machine politics in New Jersey post the death of the county line. For Andy Kim's race, obviously the First Lady Tammy Murphy was running against him for the Democratic nomination initially. Since she dropped out, he doesn't really have a race at this point. But there are some interesting congressional races happening further down ballot that could be a test of the strength of machine politics in New Jersey. So you have Bob Menendez's son, Rob Menendez, who is running for election in New Jersey's 8th district. He's facing a challenge from the Hoboken mayor there. You also have an open seat in the 3rd district, which is the one that Andy Kim currently represents. And I think both those primaries will be tests of the impact of the machine politics of the state.
Well, Erin, I'm glad you brought up Rob Menendez because, of course, the father, Bob Menendez, is currently on trial for bribery charges. He announced yesterday that he'll be running for his Senate seat again as an independent. How could the sins of the father affect the son in this primary?
Yeah, that's what everyone is asking. So I think that if this weren't the situation, his son would be in a much safer position. He easily won the race for this open seat last cycle after his father basically cleared the field for him. And so he's never had to run a tough election before. So this is going to be a really interesting test of this. He is trying to kind of separate himself from his father as much as possible. You'll see in campaign signs, he has his name Rob in bold, all caps, where Menendez is in tiny font underneath. And he is attempting to attack Bala, the mayor, and accuse him of having his own ethics issues. So this is clearly that his father's situation is clearly going to be the main storyline of the race. But I think the folks I've talked to in the state still think that Rob Menendez is favored to win, even though it could be pretty close.
That's the Rob campaign, not the Menendez campaign. How about his father's independent run, Erin? I know that there won't be anything determinative in this primary tonight, but he's apparently running this campaign as an independent without a staff. Is this real?
Apparently so. He's apparently secured enough signatures to get on the ballot as an independent in New Jersey, which has a pretty low threshold for that. I think a lot of folks expect that this is just kind of a way for him to be able to still raise campaign funds as he is currently on trial right now. I don't think this is going to have an impact. I think Andy Kim is poised to win the Democratic nomination and will be in a strong position to win the general election in November.
All right. So Menendez is still on trial. That's ongoing. Meanwhile, another trial we've all been paying a lot of attention to has wrapped up, although the appeals process and sentencing has yet to come. That, of course, being the trial of Donald Trump in the hush money case, where he was convicted on all 34 counts of falsifying business records. Erin, how do you expect that to trickle down the ballot when we consider even vulnerable Republicans who represent states Biden won, or districts Biden won in 2020, are embracing Trump and his messaging around the verdict and the idea that this was all rigged and unfair and a weaponized justice system against him? How do you see that impacting, say, the odds of Republicans being able to retain control of the House?
Yeah, so it's hard to say. We're still 5 months out from the election. Early national polls have shown, I think, like on average, a 1-point shift towards Biden at the presidential level. But that could fade, that could increase. We don't know what's going to happen. But I do think it's telling the way you've seen vulnerable Republican incumbents in the House respond to this verdict. The majority of Republicans who are in competitive elections, according to our ratings, have come in to defend Trump and dispute the results of the verdict. Meanwhile, there are a couple of members who are staying quiet. And I think that's because a lot of these Republicans are running for re-election in districts that Biden won in 2020 and that he is likely to win again in 2024. So they're in a difficult position. They have to be able to retain crossover support from Biden voters, but they're also going to have to not anger their base so much because they also need the base to vote for them in the general.
We're going to be watching for the protest vote. It's been kind of an ongoing thread here through primary season since Donald Trump became the presumptive nominee. Same for Joe Biden, for that matter. Erin, if we start seeing higher numbers for Nikki Haley tonight, do we read into that as a verdict affect, or is that just part of this campaign?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Nikki Haley is actually only on the ballot in New Mexico tonight. There are a couple of other states that have primaries, including New Jersey, but she is the only one who is on the ballot in the states that have presidential primaries in New Mexico. And so that's really going to be the only test. I don't think we can read too much into those tea leaves, just because in general, it is difficult to draw strong inferences from primary protest votes and how that will play out in the general election. A lot of times that doesn't mean that voters are abandoning their support for one candidate. It may just mean that they're registering their frustration in the moment. So we'll see what happens in New Mexico tonight.
Yeah, we'll all be watching for what the margins ultimately look like. We know, to Joe's point, that there's also been a great deal of protest voting against President Biden. We've seen that showing up specifically in protest of his policies around Israel and the ongoing war in Gaza. But we know his problems don't end there, Erin. He also has had a very big issue with the border, something he tried to address today with this executive action. Do you think that actually will translate into more voters for Biden come November, or is he actually potentially just losing more progressives or Latino voters who aren't going to be thrilled with this action?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, you know, I think with Latino voters, I want to mention that there is definitely a wide range of opinions in terms of how they view immigration as an issue. You know, they're not a monolith. But yeah, Biden is at risk at certainly of further kind of endangering his support from progressives. But I do think that this is something that a lot of vulnerable Democrats in Senate races and in House races were calling on Biden to do. Just because they have seen border security be a #1 issue in their races coming up, and being able to point to the Biden administration responding to it will be helpful for them. So I think this is certainly helpful for Democrats in down ballot competitive districts. But, you know, whether that will be offset by loss of support from progressive voters, too soon to tell, I think. But I think this was definitely something that will be helpful in terms of Democrats' ability to take control of the House and their ability to retain control of the Senate.